This is SoundStage founder Doug Schneider. You're listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, your semi-regular deep dive into news, facts, opinions, and anecdotes about everything that really matters in the world of high-performance audio. Hosts Brent Butterworth and Dennis Berger have more than 5 decades worth of audio product testing experience, and a few hours of podcasting experience as well. Now, here's Brent and Dennis.
Hello, this is the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I am Brent Butterworth, editor of SoundStage Solo.
And I am Dennis Berger, editor of SoundStage Access.
And we are here today to share with you the latest and most important news in audio.
What are we starting off with this week, man?
We are going to start off with the CES show, Consumer Electronics Show.
Are we allowed to call it that anymore? I thought it was just CES, call it CES these days.
Yeah. Well, they changed that organization changes their name and the name of the show like every 2 years. But what everyone knows is CES in Las Vegas just wrapped up as we speak yesterday, and I was there. But we're going to look at a couple of articles talking about what the greatest audio products were at the show and kind of talk about those products. Maybe talk about a little state of the art of where that show's at right now. Yeah. And next
up, there is a video from the Headphone Show, which I believe is the YouTube channel for headphones.com. They've got a new video. They've got 2 new videos up, actually. One of them, the first one, I think is probably the one we latched onto, or the one I latched onto. I want to ask you some questions about it. I want to pick your brain. The headline is provocatively titled, "Say Goodbye to the Harman Target." Yeah. And there is a follow-up called New Headphone Measurement Target FAQ. I want to pick your brain. See what you think about that. See what we can learn from that. See if any of this is valid. And what are we wrapping up with this week?
We're going to wrap up with a very special segment that'll be a big surprise to a lot of people, in which I admit defeat.
Oh, wow. Wow. That is a lot. That is a lot. Before we get there, though, I got a long road to travel first. Let's start in Las Vegas. CES.
Okay. So I was there.
Yeah.
The show has taken a lot of hits, right? But it was back in what I'm going to kind of call full force, an attempt at full force this year. And Vegas was crowded again. The hotel rooms were expensive again. It was not like last year. And the show floor was kind of... It's busy in places. The South Hall, which is where all the headphone people and a lot of the video gaming people and a lot of computer type stuff used to be, was completely shut down.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. And
why?
That's a big hall. That's 2 stories, and each story is the size of umpteen football fields.
So did they? Now, the last time I went was 2018, I think, and it was all 3 sections of the Las Vegas Convention Center, and also a lot over at the Sands Convention Center as well, like a whole floor there. And then it certainly there wasn't as much presence in the Venetian as there used to be, but there were still like a couple of floors of the Venetian. So you're saying they shut down South Hall. Was there still the Sands and the Venetian and all of that?
Well, the Sands Convention Center is now called the Venetian Convention Center.
Okay. But
that whole big convention space was, I think it was kind of sort of full-ish.
Okay.
But in the Venetian, no. In the old, where you used to go up into the towers and you go to hotel rooms and hear audio products. No, there were extremely few companies up there. I went on one floor to go see one company, and there were like 3 companies there on the whole floor. It used to be like you'd go and there'd be 50.
Yeah.
So
you couldn't do the entire Venetian in one day if audio was your focus. So
the article I found, just to kind of reference this, is, since I didn't actually do an article about this anywhere, Tech Radar had a kind of rundown of the best at CES. It's not entirely clear to me that this writer, what's his name again?
Hamish Hector. Yeah,
man, that is a cool
That's a
name.
Really cool name
for
anything.
Anything.
Yeah. That's almost NPR levels of cool.
Yeah. So anyway, but I don't think he went to the show. They're showing all supplied artwork, and there's some of the stuff I don't think was actually at the show. He shows a Focal system, but to my knowledge, Focal was not showing. And a couple things he does have in here. He has the Audio-Technica Soundburger, which is the portable record player, which came out last year, and they sold out like instantly. It was like a 60th anniversary edition, and it's very, very cool. I have one, but they're coming out with a like a regular non-60th anniversary version. It's like a little portable Bluetooth record player, so you can play your records, and it beams to a Bluetooth speaker. As he points out, there were a few sound bars there. The most exciting of which I heard by far was the JBL. I'm trying to remember. He has the model name in here. The Bar 1300X. It's about, I think it was $1,600. $1,700. And it has like detachable surround speakers, and but they actually had a cutaway or a version of it that showed you all the drivers. It was just a tour de force of engineering. Oh, cool. And I mean, just the little surround speakers that are detachable have, oh boy, let's see if I can remember this. Each one of them has a woofer and a tweeter, 2 passive radiators, and an upfiring Atmos speaker. And this is in like the size of like if you go buy like a paperback of War and Peace, it's about like that. War and Peace, for all those who don't know, being a famously extremely long and boring book. Anyway, but it was amazing. They demoed it for me, and I swear, I think had I not known it was a soundbar, I would have thought it was a full-on,
interesting
Atmos speaker system.
So I've heard a lot of people saying that exact sentence coming out of this show, but it wasn't about the JBL. It was actually about the new Nakamichi Dragon. Did you have a chance to hear that?
No. And
a lot of people now, these are all of the same people who a few years ago were saying that the Sennheiser Ambio was the first soundbar they'd ever heard that could replace a true surround sound system. Now they're saying the exact same thing about the Nakamichi Dragon, but the Nakamichi Dragon is just a beast. It's 31 drivers. It's an 11.4.6 channel soundbar system, like 4 subwoofers around the room, and you can actually you can dial in the angle of the up-firing Atmos module speakers in the soundbar and in the surround modules. It's crazy. It's like, I was like $3,500 or something like that. But I noticed that Hamish didn't cover it. And did you get to hear it? Did you hear anything about it?
No, nor did they invite me to their booth. And I just reviewed some of their products.
Interesting.
I think they would have invited me. So I don't know. There's a lot of stuff I've seen in coverage that, like I said, I'm not sure if it was actually at the show, but that soundbar is like $4,000 though, that Nakamichi.
Interesting that they're calling it the Dragon too. So that's a name that Nakamichi pulls out every couple of decades and applies it to something. So legendary tape deck for people who don't know. I think they also followed that up with like they had a turntable called the Dragon as well a few years later, and then a CD player called the Dragon. I think
so. It's kind of like fighter plane names. They just keep resurrecting them for for marketing purposes. But
you didn't hear that one. So, but the JBL you did hear, and you were impressed.
It was really, really good. There were almost no headphones there. JBL had a couple of new things, but I don't think anything groundbreaking. One thing that is interesting that's a new trend is like JBL and somebody else, I can't remember who, showed true wireless headphones where they actually have a little touchscreen on the true wireless headphone charging case. So you can control some of the modes and things like that from the case rather than trying to do it through cryptic, touch it 3 times on the right earpiece to do this and 2 times in the left earpiece to do this, like Morse code or something.
We talked about that a little bit in the last episode, but did you actually get hands-on with it this time at CES?
No.
Okay.
No.
You didn't see it.
Just saw it. Yeah. But anyway, that's interesting, though. That's potentially a good trend. But the one product I saw at the show that really blew me away was Brain Audio, Brane. And they have a new wireless speaker. I think it was 9.3 inches wide and like 7 inches deep and 7 inches high, maybe something like that. And it's got this radical new woofer technology. And, as soon as somebody says radical new driver technology, I just start going, this is going to suck. But because so often it does, it's kind of like, airliners, the people figured out what works and they just keep doing the same thing now.
Yeah.
And speakers are kind of like that. The people have kind of figured out what works, and it works really well. But this thing had, I'll be honest with you, I still don't understand how it works. They have a woofer that's about I guess it's about 6x9, like an oval shaped woofer, downfiring in the bottom. And it has two voice coils, like it has a single voice coil former, has a voice coil on the end of that former and a voice coil up, by the cone, by the spider. And in the middle of it, it's got a bunch of magnets.
Huh?
So it's kind of like a turbocharger sort of for the woofer.
Interesting.
And it's got a servo thing on there that tracks the motion and corrects it through, they have a field programmable gate array in there that has all this custom written code to kind of control the driver's motion and correct distortion and make it not blow itself up. And they played this thing and they shot it out against like a Sonos, a big Sonos that was, I don't know how much money, and a fairly large Bose, and the really, really big UE Hyperboom. And now it's more expensive. It's $600, so it's a little on the expensive side. However, it blew everything else out of the water.
Interesting.
And it was not even close. I mean, so I was, and also it's not, the non-bass part of it was pretty impressive too. They had like woofer and tweeter on each side, or mid-range and a tweeter on each side. And they used some DSP sort of stuff to, enhance the soundstage, but it didn't sound phony. It sounded really good.
Yeah.
And so, but the weird thing was, they showed me like the whole enclosure, and there's like no acoustical space for the woofer. The woofer's kind of crammed in there and there's no space around it. It was really weird, but from what I heard, it worked. It's coming out in about 2 months in March, and I was super impressed. So this is like a very portable, I think it was 7.5 pounds. It's a very portable, it's Bluetooth, it's Apple AirPlay, and also, and it's a full-on Alexa speaker. It has a mic array in it and everything. So it works like a full-on Alexa speaker.
Nice. Did you mention the price? Did I miss that?
$600.
Okay, cool.
And so I was totally blown away. I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on it because your average person is still not going to spend $600 on a wireless speaker.
No.
Someone who wants good sound might, and who wants it to double as a home system might. Oh, and it's like IP57 rated, so it's waterproof and all that kind of stuff. And I think the battery life's rated at, I can't remember, 12 hours, 20 hours, a decent amount.
Yeah, that's not bad.
And so it's like they kind of, and there just weren't any gaping holes in, so to speak, in this product. Like every question I asked them, it seemed like they'd thought it out, but they've been working on it for 5, 6, 7 years.
Very cool. So it could be like a really cool, like poolside speaker, I guess, or something like that.
Yeah. And I think it plays, we were just in a hotel room and we did not have it super cranked, but we'll see how loud it can play. Because something like that UE Hyperboom plays really loud.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I don't know, but I'm definitely looking forward to messing around with it some more. And to me, that was the really groundbreaking product at this show. That's not a high bar, though, because there just wasn't much. I mean, everybody, I know is that right? I know at least 3 audio writers who went to the show. Me, Lauren Dragon from Wirecutter, and our good friend Jeff Morrison. And we were all but by the halfway through the first day, we were all kind of done.
Yeah.
So it's sad to me because I've spent, this was my 33rd winter CES, and so I've spent a lot of my life at CES. I've spent 33 weeks at CES.
Oh, wow. When you put it like that, holy cow, man.
Yeah, I've spent well over half a year. And then when you count the summer CESs, that adds another roughly 7. So it's about 40 total CESs I've been to.
Wow.
And it used to be like I would get there for the CES Unveiled event, which is before press day. I'd go see everything I could on press day. I'd go to, and then I'd go to the show for 4 days. And when the show ended on the last day, I'd still be out on the show floor getting demos.
Yeah.
And like staying after the show had closed to finish getting demos. And
I think the first show I did was with you, and that was 2004. We stayed at the Las Vegas Hilton.
Yeah.
And like, other than Alexis Park, which was a separate little hotel where all the high-end audio stuff was, everything was in the convention center, North Central and South Hall. But it took us days to see it all, Yeah, that was my first, and then my last was 2018. And by 2018, I felt like I had left the show seeing maybe 5% of what there was to see. It was just sprawled out all over town, and it was impossible to get anything. And if you had to go from the convention center to the Venetian, it took you like 3 hours by bus, and forget calling an Uber,
Yeah.
So it changed a lot in those years. But yeah, I was 1 year shy of doing 15 in a row. So I did 14 in a row.
Yeah.
You did 33. Holy, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I was having lunch with someone right before the show, and I just realized, like, oh, wow, I only have 3 more CESs to go. And she says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'm going to retire." But by the end of the show, I was like, "This is my last CES. There's just no reason for me to go to this anymore."
Really,
it's just a giant waste of time. I spent, it ended up being an excuse to socialize.
Yeah,
I socialized a lot.
Yeah.
And the number of new products I found was, 3, 4.
Yeah.
So that were worth, noting. So anyway, I think it's dead. I think it's for audio. Now there's tons of smart whatever stuff there. And, if you're looking for, I tell you, if you're looking for a new heat pump for your house, which I'm kind of starting to do, for heat pumps, man, there were a lot of heat pumps on display. The very latest in heat pumps, which is very exciting.
Wow.
Heat pumps, but it has nothing to do with audio.
Yeah.
So, and even the Samsungs and LGs and people like that have these big giant booths, they have sound bars in there, but they're rarely really demoing them in any kind of way where you can hear anything. And there's all these people in the booths. It's like, and they'll have like some TV screens that, and it's saying like, boldly leading the way into the connected future of something or another. And
yeah.
And, and like all these people are standing there watching this, and these booths are packed and you can barely move. I'm like, what are they looking at? And like, so Sony, I'm going to start ranting now. Sony had a press conference, which I went to. And I think I saw like 5 people I knew. So Sony's press conference, they introduced the new VR version of the PlayStation.
Mm-hmm.
They talked a lot about the new Gran Turismo movie.
Yeah. And
then they also showed a car that they're working on with Honda that's going to be available in like 3 more years.
Maybe.
So, yeah, maybe. And it was a sedan. So really, really nice for the U.S. market to launch a new sedan. So... And everyone's just like, this is a giant waste of time. And they had basically no product in their booth.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you go to Best Buy, there's tons of Sony product there. There's headphones, there's earphones, there's speakers, there's sound bars, there's TVs, there's God knows how many things does Sony make, cameras. And yet Sony doesn't really show product at CES.
Yeah.
And that's just the trend. At least Samsung and LG showed product. They just don't really show it in a meaningful way, in a useful way. So at this point, you have to go like, why am I going to the show? And it's expensive. Again, it was really cheap last year when nobody went and the hotels dropped their prices, but the hotel prices are back to kind of what they were before. And
oh God, I stopped going, like I said, in 2018 because it's just like, so I think in 2012, I started sharing a room at the show with Daryl Wilkinson. And we started rooming together because that year, like on the most expensive night, a room that would normally cost you $29 a night in Vegas was all of a sudden $250. during the week of CES. And it's like, we better start, let's split these expenses. So that was 2012, and I think it was $250 a night. And we were, I think, like at the Omni or something like that. I don't know, not too far out of things.
Yeah.
The last year was 2018. We shared a room. We were at the Excalibur. It was $880 a night.
Whoa! At the stupid Excalibur?
At the Excalibur, yes. Which is not connected to anything, way out of the way. I mean, at least we could get a shuttle. We didn't have a car like you, so we had to stay somewhere where there was at least some sort of access to mass transit or something like that. Yeah, $880 a night. And that was when I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah.
I mean, and what's funny is at the time, at least, I think CES was, although becoming less relevant for people who are into hi-fi, I thought it was at least sort of interesting as a gauge of market trends, market forces, the kind of electronics that people are gravitating to, the kinds that they're buying. But like the last year that I was there, 2018, I felt even there was just sort of disconnect from that. And I felt like it was like, what is the purpose of this show? Like it doesn't even seem to be a worthwhile barometer for tastes in consumer electronics anymore, which may be why they were like, don't call it a consumer electronics show. It's just CES. I don't know if that's the case, but it kind of felt like that.
I mean, it's all smart this and smart that and health, wellness, monitor your whatever stuff. But you know what? I'm ready to put a fork in this thing.
Let's do it.
This is unless something massive changes. This is my last CES. Farewell CES. I had some great times. I had some horrible times. It was a big part of my life, but it's over now.
End of an era, man.
Yeah.
All right, let's go get something to drink, listen to some music, and we'll be right back.
Cool.
Welcome back to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Dennis Berger.
And I'm Brent Butterworth.
And in this segment, I am going to learn some stuff from you, Mr. Brent Butterworth. There's a couple of new videos up on a YouTube channel called The Headphone Show. I want to pick your brain about, causing a little bit of controversy, a little bit of a kerfuffle, if you will. The first video is called Say Goodbye to the Harman Target. And what the video talks about is the fact that headphones.com is switching over to the new B&K 5128 as a measuring headphone measurement platform. And that means basically they're going to be saying goodbye to the Harman target curve. And there's a follow-up where they've got an FAQ where they're talking about sort of the whys and wherefores and answering questions and things like that. But boy, this has led to a lot of discussion. I think the last I looked, there were like 161 comments on the first video and like 100 on the second. And I've never released a YouTube video that got that many comments. So quite the discussion here, but a lot I want to ask you about. But first, a couple of questions that I already know the answer to that I just want to ask you about for the benefit of our audience.
Okay.
What is the B&K 5128 and why does it matter?
Okay.
And why are people moving to it?
All right. So the B&K 58, that's Brule and Care. They are a very well-established Danish measurement company. They have been making headphone review gear for a long time. So the new 5128, which is not all that new. I mean, it's been kicking around for a couple of years now. They have the original headphone measurement gear that was made according to the 1980s standard. 602. I cannot remember the number, but 60268-7, I think it was. That was a fairly primitive standard that was designed primarily for hearing aid testing. And it had some problems. It really only had defined response up to, I think, 8 kilohertz. And the ear that came with it had just sort of terminated in a hole. They didn't do any attempt to replicate the ear canal in any way, right?
Yeah.
So there's been a movement for the past 7-8 years or something like that for headphone measurement companies to try to overcome these problems, to introduce ear simulators that have some kind of reliable measurements up to 20 kilohertz, and also to introduce more anthropomorphically accurate ears that actually have like an ear canal. So the B&K 5128 is kind of like the greatest extension of that effort. So they have a longer. So I have the latest Gras GRAS, another Danish measurement company. I have the latest ears from them and the latest ear simulator from them, and it's rated up to 20K, and it has an ear canal that it's not a full-on ear canal, but it goes half an inch deep, depending on where you measure from. If you go from the ear entrance point.
Most of the research that we've done about the correlation between measurements and listener preferences has been done on Gras, right?
Yeah, and it's been done on the original gear from the 1980s. Okay, so anyway, I switched over to this gear, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, something like that. And so B&K is a little different, that they have a longer ear canal, and they kind of angle the microphone in there at an angle that's more comparable to what your eardrum does. So, of course, this produces a different measurement. And what they're saying in this video is that, well, Harman curve is basically referenced to this old measurement gear. And so now we have to throw out the Harman curve. And since Harman has not released a curve for other measurement gear, we can't use Harman curve anymore. Now, I have a lot of points of contention with what they're saying here.
Can we, real quick, before we get into your beef with this, I think it might be worth explaining what we're talking about when we're talking about using the Harman target curve as a reference, because in your measurements on SoundStage Solo that you've done, you just basically raw frequency response. Here is a graph of, at 20 hertz, or 20 hertz it's here, 30 hertz it's here, 100 hertz it's here, blah blah blah, along the way. And so, but a lot of people who measure headphones would take and you look at the graph, and it's closer to a flat line than the sort of mountain range that you would publish, right? And so what they're doing is basically saying, and tell me if I'm explaining this poorly, but they're taking that mountain range and saying, let's flatten that, right? And when we do a different measurement, what are the deviations from that referenced to sort of a flat line instead of the mountain range, right?
Right.
So that's what they're describing when they're saying they're using the Harman target curve as a reference. That is what they are. All of their measurements are deformed to the point to where the Harman target curve would be flat, which is something that you've never done, at least on SoundStage Solo.
Right.
So anyway, I just want to interject that. Sorry.
In a sense, what they're trying to do is, when you use a curve like that as a reference, you're trying to convert the headphone measurement, which is pretty lumpy looking with a lot of peaks and valleys, to a speaker measurement, sort of. With a speaker measurement, we know what it's supposed to look like. It's very easy to understand. It's supposed to basically be flat. And with headphones, though, you look at all these lumps, and it takes a long time to figure out what those mean. Anyway, what they are doing here is they are looking for something, since they have this new measurement gear, which SoundGuys also has. And SoundGuys published an article on this about, it was in 2021, so it was a couple years ago. They don't have a reference curve, so they want to have a curve that they can reference the headphones they measure to. They don't have that right now because Harman hasn't published these curves for the B&K 5128. However, Harman hasn't published curves for, one of the unfortunate things about the Harman research, it's good science, but it's not necessarily good engineering. I asked them, I said, hey, can you just send me the Harman curve data so I can incorporate it? So at least I'll have it as a reference. And the data they sent me was measured with their own proprietary anthropomorphic ear because they developed their own ear to do these measurements on. The original measurements were done on the Gross gear, but then the old school Gross gear. Then they realized, this has some problems, so we're going to develop our own ear. And the curves they sent me were all from their own ear, so I couldn't really use them. And I don't know. And when I told them, I said, "Well, I can't really use this." They were kind of like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Maybe we should publish curves on some other stuff." I don't know if they ever did. When I was looking to maybe use Harman curve as a reference, Doug Schneider said, the founder and publisher of SoundStage, said, "I don't think we should do that." He said, I'm uncomfortable referencing headphones to one manufacturer's standard, even if that standard is based on good science. And I would much rather you just put a headphone that comes pretty close to Harman curve in as a reference with your raw measurements and show the raw measurement of like a AKG K371 headphone, which is pretty close to Harman curve, and then show, that's a closed back dynamic headphone. So if you're going to do a dynamic headphone review, show that and then show the AKG K371 so people can see how the product under test compares to a Harman curve product. Okay. And that's what I've been doing for a long time. And there's no reason not to continue that, in my opinion.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about in the follow-up video from the Headphone Show is they got questions from people basically saying, like, why don't you just do that? Why don't you just show the raw grass for everything and maybe do some comparisons? And they brought up this study from Cleveland and McGill, graphical perception of different measurement data. And they talked about something called the parallel line illusion, where when you're looking at these sort of curves, basically you miss differences in sort of slopes between them. I wanted to ask you about that and sort of like why you thought maybe that wasn't valid, because they're showing like either curve and you look at it and you're like, that looks similar. And then they show it if that was referenced to something, and you're seeing these little anomalies that don't necessarily see in the original data. What is your criticism of that?
All right. So I will say when I post my measurements the way I have been, I'm not telling people this thing needs to match this. As we have so often said, the Harman curve is descriptive, not prescriptive. Okay. If I do that, if I say, this should match this, then the Harman curve becomes prescriptive. And it's telling people all headphones should match the Harman curve. Headphones should be judged by how well they match the Harman curve. Okay. If headphones don't match the Harman curve, they are bad. You won't like them, is the implication.
Right.
I don't find that to be true. I don't like that approach. I don't like the approach of like, well, headphones have to track this line or they're bad or you won't like them or whatever. And I also don't think that anyone can look at these tiny differences in response in headphones and tell us how the listener is going to perceive that. So you can say, here's these differences that you don't notice otherwise, but we don't know, where's the research that shows those differences are meaningful? We do know what constitutes a meaningful difference. Harman did a lot of research on this way back, like 20, 25 years ago. And, they showed like how wide, how the Q and the magnitude of different resonances, how audible they are. So we know that, the higher the Q or the narrower the bandwidth of the resonance, the less audible it is. We know that, peaks are more noticeable than dips and things like that. So you can figure that out, but you would need to be a very, very heavy-duty scientist to be able to look at a curve and go, well, that's that. And then you still might be wrong.
Yeah.
So I don't like this idea that like, we got to reference everything to this. I've upgraded my gear, and it was a game changer only in one way, in that it allowed me to do really meaningful and useful isolation measurements with earphones, which I couldn't do before.
Yeah.
Because you had to put them in the little stainless steel coupler, which is just a cylinder, and it just had no meaning at all.
Yeah.
So And the old ear was far enough away from a human ear that was also pretty dicey in terms of, but the new ones are great for that. And
yeah.
So I don't know. What? Go ahead.
One other point that I thought he made that was pretty cool was he was talking about the fact that the Harman research, right? All of the research that resulted in the Harman curve is not, you can't reduce all of that research to the Harman curve, right? The Harman target curve is one aspect of the research, and the research about the relative balance between bass and treble, and also the sort of, the slope of the slope of the diffuse field measurements, and whether a slope or like a shelf, the relative validity of that. I've been dealing with that a lot. I'm reviewing the NAD C3050 LE now, which is a integrated amp that's got Dirac in it. And so Dirac is a room correction system. For anyone who doesn't know, it basically takes and can remove anomalies caused by your room. I won't dig into it too much here, but Dirac has their target curve of what a speaker in a room should sound like. And NAD has their target curve of what a speaker in a room should sound like. Dirac's is a slope. NAD's has a shelf. And what's interesting is I find that it's not completely relevant in my case because I'm only running room correction up to about 950 hertz, about 2 octaves above the crossover frequency in my room. So it doesn't matter as much. But what is funny is I find I like a shelf better, but I don't like as high a shelf as NAD has, and I tend to transition it into more of a slope before it cuts off. But I found that discussion of the relative merits of shelves versus slopes interesting and fascinating for me personally, just because I don't know as much about headphone measurements. And so I thought that was interesting that that's something that applies there too, equally as well as it does to the in-room stuff. So do you have any thoughts on that, the sort of shelves versus slopes in terms of their diffuse field measurements, or do you just find that uninteresting?
I find it uninteresting. I don't find there's everybody. Look, there's so many people researching this stuff. There's so many people out there running measurements now, and so many people saying things and coming to conclusions. And I just don't find. I find Harman curve is gives you a good idea of how a kind of a normal headphone sounds. And so if you
a normal headphone that most people would like.
Normal headphone that most people would like sounds, right? And if you deviate from that curve, that means people are probably less likely to like it, but doesn't mean they won't like it. Doesn't mean they won't like it better. And then there are 3 variants of Harman curve for in-ears and 3 variants of Harman curve for headphones, which doesn't get talked about a lot. So Harman curve does allow for some individual preference, but my attitude is, hey, look, it's useful as something you can. I mean, I just measured a headphone or earphones, and boy, it was like massive bass, massive boosted bass, massive boosted treble, and you look at that and go, yeah, that might not be a great choice. Relative to Harman curve and relative to lots of other things out there too. Because in my comparison charts, I'll put a bunch of different things in there to try to show people the range of what you might expect. And things in many cases have gotten good reviews. All right. And also I have to point out something. Measurement gear changes all the time. All right. And measurement techniques change all the time. I really think that like the idea that one new piece of measurement gear is going to come along and everything changes and all the old measurements we have don't mean anything anymore. Well, no, the headphones that sounded good to people last year or 2 years ago still sound good to people now. And the headphones that sounded bad to people 2 or 3 years ago still sound bad to people now. Those headphones are our reference. Okay. The public preference, the science behind the public that found that public preference is the reference. That is what Harman curve is. Okay. Harman curve is not, it might be referenced to a specific set of measurements on a specific thing, but Harman target is not gone and it's still going to be there. And I've looked at other things other people are doing. And in my view, and I've seen, Sound Guys has already published an article a while back about how they're trying to adjust their, they have a Brewing Care 5128 as well, and they're trying to kind of adjust their measurements to take into account Harman curve, even though it's a different piece of measurement gear. And, headphones.com is saying, well, we're going to, instead of doing that, we're going to reference it to a modified version of diffuse field, which is the really, really old measurement standard that everyone abandoned. But, their reasoning is pretty sound. I mean, I don't have an argument with it, but what I have an argument with is this idea that we're going to judge headphones by how well they track this one curve. And if they're not on this curve, you won't like it. And if they are on this curve, you'll like it. Yeah. I think audio is more interesting than that. And it's sort of like, what? Art Tatum's is the best piano player, so I'm only going to listen to him.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Wow.
So, I think there's, fundamentally, look, what these guys are saying in this video is basically correct, but and it's correct, right? They understand. This is a treat. They understand the technical issues here and all that sort of stuff. But as a really old guy who's done audio measurements since 95 or something, and who's also worked as a consultant as well. I've consulted for a lot of companies, and I found a lot of companies want to, as I used to put it to them, you're trying to MBA this thing, as in Masters of Business Administration. And they're trying to come up with a simple, measurement procedure they can do that will guarantee their product will be well reviewed and popular. Well, good luck. And I told them all, I said, look, because a lot of these companies, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of these companies, like major companies, really didn't have audio measurement capabilities to any extent. Some of them still don't. And so I would do the measurements, but I would say, hey, look, this is meaningful. This is something you should pay attention to. Here's another measurement, though, that doesn't. And then I do listening tests. And, especially with so many of these products coming out, like sound bars and things like that, these things have so much audio processing in them. And headphones do too nowadays, by the way. Sorry. There's so much audio processing going on in there that you really still need to put this stuff in front of people to really get a good sense of what you might like and might not like. But that's expensive and hard to do, and nobody can achieve Harman did, but it's pretty rare when people can achieve a decent sample size. I can't, but I at least get a few people. The idea that someone's going to be able to run headphone measurements and provide their audience with a rock solid, recommendation that the person's guaranteed to love, I don't believe in. I've not seen that happen. Frankly, this Gras stuff that I have, the higher resolution coupler and the anthropomorphic ear, except in isolation for earphones, it has not made a difference in my measurements. I still don't know what's going on above 10K. There's almost no research there. There's the so-called Knowles curve, which is a variation of Harman curve, and Knowles did research above that, but they're the only ones, to my knowledge, who've done it. And based on my experiments and reading the papers and everything, it looks to me like it's got some validity. But I still don't really, no one's really talking about anything above 10K in their measurements. So we have these high resolution couplers, but we're not doing anything with them. They're looking to run a measurement and say, hey, you'll like this headphone, you won't like this headphone. Well, good luck.
I'll tell you what I do find heartening, though, is a lot of that. I don't know this gentleman's name that's in the Headphone Show, but I'm sorry if you're out
tell
there
us your name. Like we do here on the SoundStage Audiophile podcast with Brent Butterworth
and Dennis Berger.
Yes. See, how hard was that?
Yeah. But so I don't know his name, but I'll say there's one thing that's heartening to me is that a lot of the people that are in this discussion, a lot of people that I'm seeing in this channel, and a lot of the people that are talking about Harman target curve and different target curves and headphone measurements and all of that, I'm looking at these people going, wow, I think this dude could actually hear above 10K. That's novel. So I kind of like that. That gives me hope for the future because for so much of my career in audio, most of the people that have been dominating the discussion, I don't think could really hear above 8K. So you're talking about, what's going up above 10K. I think
good point. Very good point.
Yes, it does my heart good to see people talking about this and contributing to the conversation that could actually say something meaningful about what's going up above 10K.
Yeah, and if you look at the comments on these things, they're pretty intelligent and
yeah. I think this is a pretty good place to wrap up this segment of our conversation. Do you want to take a break real quick and come back?
Let's do that. That would be delightful.
Cover this mystery topic that we've got.
Yeah.
All right, Ann. Well, we'll be back in a minute.
We're back. This is the SoundStage audiophile podcast with your hosts, Brent Butterworth
and Dennis Berger.
So we are here in our last segment, which we kind of introduced as a mystery segment. Although we did say that I would admit defeat, which I'm going to. But I'm going to reference an article on SoundStage Solo, and the article is titled "A Fond Farewell," and it's by me, Brent Butterworth. I am actually leaving SoundStage.
Yeah.
So this is not due to any, normally when writers leave a publication, it's because they're angry at the publication. That is not the case at all here. I have been offered a full-time position at Wirecutter, which is a consumer review site that's very well known. And I've been working for them part-time for about 10 years now as a freelancer or a part-timer. And they offered it to me, and it just basically means I don't have to beat my brains out anymore trying to kind of do two jobs at once. Yeah. And I'm getting old, man. I can't be staying up all night doing headphone measurements and stuff anymore. Yeah. So not too often anyway. So I took it, and now that doesn't SoundStage Solo is going to continue. Our friend Jeff Morrison, who we should probably have on next time. Yeah. Our friend Jeff Morrison has taken it over. And, we've known Jeff for 20 years or so.
This is not the first time that Jeff has filled your shoes.
That's true. He took over. I left Home Entertainment Magazine. He took over as editor. And so, people, if you're a reader of SoundStage Solo, you've probably already noticed Jeff's reviews popping up here and there. And so this will be a nice transition. I think they're still working out who's going to do the measurements. And I'm going to probably I told them I'd measure anything that can get to me by the end of the month. So I'll have maybe a month's worth of measurements in the can there. But, oh my gosh, headphone measurements are so controversial and complicated.
We should talk about that sometime.
Yeah, we should talk about that. It'd be a good topic for future conversations.
Yeah.
The next episode of the SoundStage audiophile podcast is going to be my last, sadly. And Doug, our publisher, is still figuring out how he's going to transition to a couple of new hosts for that. But I imagine,
it's going to be my last too. The few people that we've talked to this about just assumed that I would keep going without you, and I have two to a one. I asked them all, have you ever seen the 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock? And they were all like, no. And I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for that. That was the last movie that Costello made without Abbott. And it was terrible. And there's there is look, a SoundStage audiophile podcast without Brent is a SoundStage audiophile podcast without Dennis, and it's just we're a duo, we're a dynamic duo, and I think our dynamic is what has made this first season of the podcast work. So we are going to try to pass the baton over to a new duo who has their own dynamic and their own history and their own chemistry. And we think, that's going to give them the opportunity to change things up, to have different perspectives than ours. I'm hoping whoever takes over for us, maybe they disagree a little more than you and I do, because that would be interesting and entertaining. But it's been a good run. We've been at it for a year now.
Yeah, I just have to. So I'm admitting defeat because our old friend Ernie Fisher, who's the former editor and publisher of the Inner Ear Report, has been tormenting me on Facebook for years, basically telling me I'm just a kid. I don't know what I'm talking. I'm 61, by the way. I'm just a kid. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't have the experience to be reviewing audio gear, which I've been reviewing for 32 years now, something like that. Yeah. And so, Ernie, you win.
He got rid of you.
He
man.
was right. He was right. He was right.
Wait.
I'm just not up to the task of reviewing audio gear.
Is that what he was right about?
That's what he was right about. He's right.
Okay.
I'm just not up to it, and my career has washed out, and it's all over. I'm still doing Wirecutter, but that's more like sound bars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But which to Ernie and a lot of people don't count as audio gear. But I've washed out of the audio industry, man. I failed. My career's over.
On a more serious note, I wanted to talk about this article because you made some really interesting points here and sort of laid out a timeline that I hadn't given much thought to. So you launched SoundStage Solo when? Was it 2013? Was that right?
No. It was more recent. I think it was 2019.
2019?
No,
oh my gosh.
It was 2018.
No. 2018. Okay. But even in that short time, like the headphone market has really, really changed.
Oh God.
You sort of laid out some of the changes and how it has evolved and point to where it's going. I thought that was really interesting. So do you want to talk about some of that, like some of the changes you've seen in just the short time that you've been doing SoundStage Solo?
Sure. Well, when we started, I started with SoundStage 9 years ago, and that was 2013. And I think my first things were toward the end of 2013. And if memory serves, I think Doug just hired me to do some measurements because I went back and looked at my old invoices, and my first invoice for them was just for measurements. But then it quickly evolved into me basically doing headphone reviews for SoundStage Experience, writing the monthly column in there, although it was not headphone specific. I was free to trash people across the whole audio spectrum, not just headphones. And but then I think it was around, SoundStage Experience has a lot of movie reviews and things like that have nothing to do with headphones. And so I finally talked Doug into doing a headphone specific site. And I want to say that was 2018 probably.
Okay.
But so when we first started this, Bluetooth was kind of not a thing. It existed and it was in some headphones, but it was more like those trucker headsets that truckers wear that you can find at truck stops and like nowhere else. And it was starting to make its way into headphones, but they were all like so bad that we didn't review any. There was no such thing as audiophile Bluetooth headphones. It was a lot of really basically cheap stuff, and I think it was 3 years before I reviewed a Bluetooth headset.
One of the things I've always appreciated most about the way you write, the way you cover technology, whether it's way back in the day doing home theater stuff or more recently headphone stuff, is It's always struck me that you're not very interested in solved problems, right? You're after the unsolved problems.
Right.
You're a Wild West kind of guy. You want to be in the unexplored territory. So I I kind of figured that there would be a day when you would walk away from primarily, headphone coverage, but maybe, when everything had kind of been figured out, right? Do you think we're close to that point, or is there any unexplored territory left that you maybe lament the fact that you can't explore?
Well, I still will probably get a chance to explore some of this stuff because I still help out on Wirecutter with the headphone measurements and stuff.
That's true.
But, I'm still exploring some things like noise canceling. Wirecutter has a single number noise canceling rating, which I developed and which I kind of, I ran a quick panel with like 4 people just to confirm it and did it. But I'm trying now to do a more structured scientific kind of test that really establishes that, because there's so many people who say, oh, our headphones reduce noise by 30 dB or whatever, but they don't in any way define that. And there are ways to define it, and accurate ways to define it. And I am still going to do that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're right. I'm not interested in solved problems. I'm not interested in headphone amps, okay? Because you know what? They work fine. When you have me saying that and Critical saying that, who's very well-known headphone reviewer guy, I'm sorry, and no one else presenting evidence that counters our contentions. I'm sorry, maybe we have a point. I think we know how to voice headphones, and there's going to be some variance, and different manufacturers want to do different things, and people will like that or not like it, and that's fine. All I can do is say, hey, here's where these are in the spectrum of headphones, but I just don't think that there's a lot to be, and of course there's the whole spatial audio thing, and there's a lot to be explored in DSP with headphones, which makes the measurements really, really hard and sometimes meaningless. So there's a lot to be explored here. Whether or not people will pick it up and explore it is the big question.
You and I have talked about ways we would like to see the SoundStage Audiophile podcast evolve under new hosts. I want to ask you, how would you like to see SoundStage Solo evolve under the new leadership of Jeff Morrison? Well,
Jeff's writing is already more entertaining than mine. That's a big step forward. Jeff's a really funny writer. And I would like to see them. I have limitations on my measurements. The actual ears and fake ears and ear simulators I use are great, but I have a Audiomatica Clio, which is still a good device, but it is really hinky to get Bluetooth measurements out of it because of the delay, the latency. And a lot of times I can, and I'm almost always able to find some way to compensate for it, but I'd like to see them get somebody in with an audio precision that can more, as far as I know, from what I know from going to their seminars, not from actually using the gear, but from going to their seminars, it appears they have a much better plan for dealing with latency than Clio does, which is no plan, basically. So I think that, especially with true wireless becoming just such a big part of the market, I think having more consistent and more probably accurate measurements of true wireless headphones will be, and Bluetooth headphones too, will be a really important and wonderful thing if they can pull that off.
Cool. Well, I think it's about time to wrap this one up, Bubba.
Yeah.
You ready to do some credits and roll on and start preparing for our final episode together?
Yeah. So, okay. So this was a production of Butterburger Productions.
Yeah. That means that we recorded it, we engineered it, and one of us mixed and mastered and edited it, and we'll figure that out after we hit stop.
Always do.
We're a presentation of the SoundStage Network, which is a collection of 9 microsites that cover all sorts of topics in audio, from, very affordable stuff, from headphones to connected audio to super high end and everything in between. Who's doing music this time around, man?
Let's do some more of my music, since we only have 2 more to go, and
yeah,
I want to get all the free promo I can. I'm working on a new album, and so I'd like for people to hear my music, and maybe you like it, maybe you don't. But if you do like it, you can kind of maybe follow me on Facebook or something like that, and kind of keep track of what I'm doing, and you can get more of my stuff.
Cool.
Stuff like that. So what else do we have to credit?
Well, we don't. We can just say goodbye.
Okay, we can do that.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
See you in a few weeks. Bye.
Oh, wait. I just figured out another way they can make the podcast better. They can do it in Atmos.